Okay, so today you should have already watched the first line lecture that's just talking about the concept of line in general. And now we're going to talk about some specific exercises that we're going to do with line. So we're going to talk about blind contour, we're going to talk about continuous line drawing, and then we're going to talk about cross contour. Okay, so first let's define some of these things. Blind contour. Creating a blind contour line drawing is a really great drawing exercise. It's kind of classic. It's a classic thing to utilize in drawing classes. Sometimes art instructors who assign this kind of miss the point. I ask my students if they've created a blind contour line drawing, and most of them answer that they have, maybe like in high school, if you think back to when you were in high school. When I ask them the purpose of the exercises, a lot of times the students are kind of clueless. Like, well, we did this thing, my teacher had me do this thing, but I don't know why I did this thing. So let's talk about the why of this, right? Blind contour line drawing has several different benefits. The first one is that it improves our hand-eye coordination, which when we're working on drawing, particularly when we're working on observation-based drawing, which is mostly what we do in this class, hand-eye coordination is super important. Secondly, blind contour line drawing forces you to look at the object that you are drawing. That sounds a little bit obvious. But a lot of times when we're drawing, the thing that I kind of say over and over again in this class is I want you to draw what you see, not what you know. So sometimes our brains get in the way of our drawing ability because they kind of intercept what you're seeing before it gets to your hands and says, no, I know what this looks like. I can draw this without actually looking at it, if that makes sense. So we don't want to do that. And perhaps most importantly, another skill is it helps the artist to understand that representational drawing is all about observation, which is something I really hammer in this class. That's one of the main points that we get into in this class. Without keen observation skills, the representational artist is lost. Remember, the first secret to drawing is that drawing is at least 50% observation. So here are some examples of blind contour drawing. Let's jump back to this slide. So I have on the side here just a contour line drawing of a hand. And so what you're doing is you have your starting line and then you don't pick up your pencil all the way through. So you're just meandering around and you're not looking at the drawing, you're only looking at whatever you're doing a drawing of, and you don't pick up your pencil until you get to that finish line. So it's kind of awkward, it's not going to look super precise, and that's okay. That's not really the point. The point is to develop our observation skills and to develop this connection between our eyes and our hands. So here are just some examples of portraits done in blind contour. I happen to really like them. I think they're kind of beautiful and whimsical and interesting. And part of this connects back in art history, which I've mentioned before. I also teach art history, so I kind of like to slide those little art history lessons into you sometimes. There's a surrealist and Dada art movement technique called automatic drawing, and blind contour really connects to that. And one of the ideas behind it is connecting to kind of your subconscious. So there's some different kinds of levels here. But blind contour portraits look something like this. They're a little bit goofy, they're a little bit messy, but it's a really good practice. It's a really good exercise. You can do it in pencil. You can also do it in pen, which kind of sometimes is a little easier because there's a little bit of a smoother flow when you're working with pen. So if you want to use your Micron pen for this activity, you can. Okay. Next thing, continuous line drawing. Definitely related to blind contour drawing. All three of the things we talk about today are really interrelated. You'll see that pretty clearly, I think. So the next thing we want to explore is continuous line drawing. The first thing you should recognize is that no drawing is going to be perfect. And letting go of this idea of perfect and kind of the treacherousness of perfection is really important when you're starting out and building any new skill, including drawing. With continuous line drawing, the imperfections will be very clear. However, it's often these very same imperfections that make the drawings so visually interesting and really make them kind of special and engaging. So instead of trying to avoid the imperfections of the mark, embrace them and allow them to add a little bit of character to the end result. Students stress themselves out with these activities that I'm talking about today because they're trying to control and make everything perfect. And that's not really the point. And the way these techniques are designed, you really can't make them perfect. It's actually impossible. So you need to just let go of that from the beginning. So the first step is once you place your pen or pencil on the surface of your sketchbook, do not remove it until the drawing is complete. You may not pick up your pencil at all. It has to stay in contact with the paper the entire time. Your goal is to describe the subject with one singular line. It can become thicker and thinner in areas, but it should never break. It can kind of swirl around on itself, but you are not allowed to pick up your pencil. Second, try to move your hand at a similar speed in which you observe the subject with your eyes. So as you're looking at the subject and moving your hand to do the drawing, try to move your hand in unison with your eyes as they move along the edges of what you're drawing. This will help create more accurate proportions and shapes. But remember, perfection is not attainable, and I don't want you to worry about it, so let that go. Third, don't erase. No erasing allowed. In fact, it's maybe even better if you use pen, because then you can't erase. But even if you use pencil, I don't want to see any erase marks. I will take off points. Leave the imperfections and let them be a human element in your work. As humans, we're attracted to artifacts that are clearly made by other humans. That's why it's kind of a selling point when you see something online that's handmade. That means there's some kind of connection, right? A human element in it. So imperfections are a positive. And lastly, repeat. Do several drawings in one sitting and try different tools. Try it with pencil, try it with pen, try it with charcoal. You may find that you're more comfortable completing the exercise with a graphite pencil instead of an ink pen, or vice versa. So here's an example of a continuous line drawing. And so the difference here when we look at this versus looking at the blind contour is that you can look at the surface. You just can't pick up your pen. Okay, so you have a little bit more control and you can go back and loop around and create some nuance and layering if you want, but you are just not picking up your pen. Okay, here's another example of a continuous line drawing. This one is of a doggy. Okay, so the last exercise we're going to talk about today is cross contour. This serves a slightly different purpose, but it's still kind of related and it's still very line centric. So everything we're talking about relies exclusively on line, not on shape, not on value, just pretty much on line. Before we look at the concept of cross contour lines, I first want to review the definition of contour lines. So we talked about this in the first lecture about line, what contour line means. But I want us to kind of reiterate that before we move forward. Contour lines are the outlines. They're the outside edges of something, but we also have contour lines within. So like if you're looking at a face, the contour line of my face is what I'm tracing with my finger right now. But there's also the contour around the individual components of my face, right? So it's the outlines of something, but you have interior and exterior contours, okay? So that's slightly confusing. But a simplified way to think about contour lines is they're the outlines. Typically, we use contour lines to define the edges of objects and details within them. Remember in our 5 steps of beginning drawing, at the first lecture at the beginning of the class, when I was talking about finding the edges? When you find the edges, you are defining the contour lines, okay? So contour lines are visible lines or lines defined by contrast. So that's where in the last lecture online when I talked about implied line, those can also be contour lines because like between my forehead and my hair, that's not a real line. That's not a hard line. It's implied by contrast between the color and texture of my hair and of my forehead. Okay, makes sense? In other words, we can actually see contour lines in most circumstances. So a contour line is something that you can see. Cross contour lines are implied lines that may or may not be visible on the subject. Instead of defining the edges and the details of the subject, cross contour lines describe the form. And as we'll learn in the next unit when we talk about shape, form is the 3-dimensional version of space, okay? Of shape. So when you take shape and make it 3-dimensional, that's form. Cross contour lines flow over the form of an object like this. A good way to understand this concept is to take your finger and move it slowly across the surface of an object. So if you start over here outside your cheekbone, then go up over your cheekbone, down into the dip by your nose, up over the bridge of your nose, into the dip, back up over your cheekbone. The way your finger is moving up and down like that to show the form, to show the three-dimensional surface, that's the cross contour. So that's giving us information about the volume and about the surface elevation of a form. Okay? So try that. Go ahead and take your finger and go over. It doesn't have to be your face. It can be something else like sitting on the table in front of you or something. But go ahead and take your finger and move it slowly over the surface of an object, following a straight path. Watch your finger move as you move it and try to imagine that it's leaving lines as it moves. Your finger will move and change direction according to the form. It'll go up, it'll go down, like this. Another way to understand this concept is to look at a topographical map. Lines on a topographical map are closer together in locations where the elevation changes more steeply, and they're further apart where the elevation is more flat and constant. We can understand the form of the terrain by the lines that are printed on the map. The best way, however, to understand the concept of cross-contour lines is simply to practice drawing them by observing the subject. Simple objects, like an apple in my example you can see here, work best if you're new to this concept. So don't pick something that's really complicated. There's a practical reason for understanding cross-contour lines. This concept is important in communicating form in your drawings and your paintings, if you take painting later, and can help you make smart decisions regarding the direction of your stroke or how you make the mark, how you make marks in drawing, whether it's with pencil pen or with a brush if you're painting. While cross-contour lines can flow in generally any direction, in most circumstances, you'll want to consider lines that flow vertically, up and down, or horizontally, left and right, around the form. So in this apple drawing, you can see that I've put in these red lines showing the vertical direction of the cross contour. Brushstrokes or marks made with a drawing medium are more effective in communicating the form if they flow with the cross contour lines. So if you're running your finger over this form and the way your finger changes directions, your strokes, the marks you make with your pen or pencil or charcoal, are going to change direction in the same manner over the surface when you're replicating that in a drawing. This is true for any drawing or painting medium. Doesn't matter what kind of marks you're making, they look more realistic and are more effective if they change direction with the surface of whatever you're drawing. So we want your strokes to flow in harmony with the cross contours of the subject and in turn communicate more about the form of the object. When combined with a consistent use of value, which we haven't talked about yet, but we're going to get into value soon, the illusion of form in a drawing or painting is easily achieved. So then here's just some examples of cross-contour drawing. So you can see that this is just about finding those directional kind of cross-contour surface lines that show us the form, which is the three-dimensional version of the shape of our subject matter, of whatever we're drawing. Here's another example. It's a little more detailed. These are from drawing classes. And here's one that is has a little more texture imbued in it, but it's the same kind of concept. Okay, so we'll just pause here for a second. So when you go back onto Canvas and look at your modules and find the exercises related to this, you should now have a pretty comfortable understanding of what I mean by cross contour and by your blind contour drawing and your continuous line drawing. All right, see you next time.